Sarah Johnston, who's going to give an introduction, and Kevin Rackham and Bonnie Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Dembrow. Good morning, and thank you for attending our hearing on student debt. Welcome to our community partners, Working Families Oregon, Jubilee Oregon, and thank you to our representatives for taking the time out today. My name is Sarah Johnston. I'm a senior at Portland State. I'm a political science major, and I'll be graduating with $25,000 in student debt. This panel will introduce the national context of the issue. There are other factors that affect workers under 35 in addition to student debt. Those are low wages, high unemployment, housing costs, lack of health insurance, and lack of family policy. A college degree has become a requirement for breaking into the middle class. And at the same time, the cost of college has tripled since 1980. Low wages have correlated with the decline in union membership. Workers under 35 in 1980 had 20% union membership. That's declined to 10% today. And the Great Recession has hit young workers hardest. 2010 unemployment rates show that almost 1 in 5 workers under 24 are unemployed, more than 20% in Latinos, and almost 30% for African Americans. In the last 10 years, employer-sponsored health insurance has declined almost 15%. That's from 2000 to 2010. And young people without health insurance are more likely to put off seeking medical treatment, and has led to higher ER visits among those 19 to 29. The cost of living is another factor that affects people under 35. More than half of adults under 35 live with their parents, and for those who don't, we spend 30% of our income on housing. Lower wages and increased living costs have led to an increase on reliance on credit. Since 1990, credit card debt under 35 has increased more than 80%. These factors have made raising a family much harder. With the lack of family protection cited in our report, people still get sick. And the lack of these protections leaves workers at risk of losing their jobs. This has disproportionately affected women. 25% of working mothers have cited the lack of family leave protections for the reason for quitting their job. So while the cost of education has tripled since 1980, workers under 35 still deal with low wages, high unemployment, housing costs, lack of health insurance, and a lack of family policy protections. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Rackham. I'm a junior here at Portland State studying political science, and I currently have about $21,000 of student debt. I'm going to talk about the demand for higher education today. And there's really never been a greater demand for higher education than there is today. High school students are constantly told that they've got to go to college to get a good job, and people who are underemployed or unemployed are seeing college more and more as a way to get out of that. And numbers back that up. There is now 60% of jobs in the US that require a bachelor's degree, while in 1970, that number was less than 30%. Another report indicates that the number of jobs requiring master's degrees will rise by 22% in the next 8 years, and 20% for doctoral degrees or professional degrees. Numbers from the Census Bureau show that the average median income for a full-time worker with a bachelor's degree or higher is $21,000 higher than that for a full-time worker with high school diploma. There's a real benefit to higher education, and enrollment numbers show that as well. The 2009-2010 school year had record-breaking enrollment, both nationally and in Oregon. However, in Oregon, our community colleges reported a decrease in enrollment for the following school year. Too many students found that they could not afford to attend college. Similarly, while the market for jobs that require higher education is growing, the number of qualified people isn't meeting it. Economist Tony Carnevale projects that there will be 22 million more jobs in the USA that would require a degree by 2018, but not enough people to fill them. While it's clearly becoming more important for the average person to go to college and to develop a better educated workforce, getting there is not proving to be easy, as we will show you. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Bonnie Riley. I'm a senior studying political science, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more, expanding on the national epidemic of student debt and discussing the recent cost shifting onto the student. Higher education has become an essential step in the ultimate goal of achieving the American dream. Unfortunately, in order to achieve this dream, many young people are forced to finance their education using student loans. Students have taken out $864 billion in federal loans and $150 billion in private loans in order to finance their education. Student debt now exceeds $1 trillion and has increased nearly 50% from 2007 to 2011. This is an issue that we literally cannot afford to ignore any longer. Although students are ultimately responsible for their own lending habits, there are underlying structural issues that we shouldn't ignore. When we look at this issue, we need to consider the significant disinvestment in higher education by the government. We're living in the midst of an unfortunate collision of government cutbacks and increased tuition costs. As a result of this, students are left to make up for the difference, which inevitably leads to increased borrowing. From 2001 to 2010, average tuition for public universities in the United States increased by 47%, and this number continues to rise. When increases like this occur, students are the ones left to deal with the consequences. In 2001, U.S. states provided public universities an average of $8,974 per full-time student. This number has dropped to an average of $6,380 in 2011. That's a 42% decrease in real funding. Government cutbacks and hikes in tuition are largely out of the students' control, which leaves them feeling hopeless and alone. Although student debt is a national epidemic, it's still important to understand how our fellow Oregonians are impacted. In order to better understand this, I'm going to share the story of Gail. Gail's son had student debt that exceeded $200,000. He was unable to reconsolidate his debt, and he grew increasingly hopeless. He wondered how he could ever overcome this burdensome debt. Gail believes that student debt was one of the factors that drove her son to his suicide. Even after informing lenders of her son's death, Gail continued to receive statements from collectors. It's unfortunate that we're allowing our local residents to leave school feeling burdened, taken advantage of, and without hope. All this at a time when they were supposed to be securing their place in the world, finding jobs, buying houses, and starting families. Thank you.
Okay, the next panel.
If you have any
Questions.
you can have
I'm
them
sorry.
after the panel.
Yeah. Colleagues, any questions?
Hi, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. Along with not supporting the direct costs of education, tuition, and things like that, I'm wondering if you notice any trends on the kind of supplemental support like childcare that the state is providing to universities and community colleges and to enable their students to go to work. You've read some statistics about how women in particular tend to go into poverty, and many of them are struggling to take care of children at the same time as get an education and be able to get ahead. And I know that's been a big issue, childcare subsidy at university, and there may be other big factors too. I don't know if you've looked at any of those kind of trends.
We didn't actually specifically look at childcare subsidy at the university, but that is something we should probably look into, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I have a question too. It struck me that as students are taking on more debt, that's not relieving them of the burden of having to work as well while they're in college. I mean, I think that's something also that's changed, is that more and more students have to work, very heavy hours while they're going to school, which really gets in the way of their ability to, to fully commit to school and creates a lot of challenges. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think most of us work part to full-time jobs while in school. I worked full-time for the first 2 years of my college education while taking full-time credits. It's taken me 5 years to graduate and $25,000 at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely the same issue for me. It's also taken 5 years because I work full-time, especially during this season, because I know a lot of us work like service and retail jobs, because that's really, that's all we can really do at this point. It's kind of hard to juggle both during the holiday season. it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for wonderful, excellent presentations. And I just want to point out that your description of the problem with the trends, I think, are critical. But I also want to point out how real world the issues are, and just share with the audience that school and education was sort of the primary concern out there in terms of the voting public. And so I think this presentation is so timely and critical. We just left the Oregon Business Summit where the discussion there clearly is that at the federal level also there's recognition of the need here. So I just wanted to share that with you, and thank you again for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's have a round of applause again. Thank you to this group.